Yes.
All right, I need a motion to approve the agenda.
Make a motion to approve the agenda.
Second.
Jay Schreier,
Yes.
Dennison,
Yes.
Burnwell,
Yes.
All right, so tonight we have Travis Squires with us. He's going to talk to us a little bit about where we're at financially, specifically with the general obligation notes for Sycamore and for the park. So, okay, Travis, I'll hand it over to you. Thanks for being here.
Can I make a quick statement?
Yeah, sure.
So part of this, of the $900,000 is the purchase of the park and to pay off the Finestead family and to reimburse us back around $200,000 in funds that we've already expended towards payments. Kind of the urgent, there's been some question about why the urgency, not necessarily 100% why we're doing it, pushing it through, but Dale Finestead's wanting to move out of his home into another option, and part of this money will allow him to do that. So I've been pushing Ben and Travis, let's get this together so we can pay the Finsteads off, and then Dale can, he's out there around construction with the school and has options to maybe move to a retirement center, and so we want to accommodate that.
Very good. And then you need money for Sycamore. So at least that's what Christy tells me. So thanks for coming. For those in the audience, if you haven't met, Travis at Piper. We work with basically Iowa governmentals across the state on school financing, city financing, county financing. So we do work with the school on their project and work with the city for many years. One of the things that we've been focused in on here is just making sure your long-range plan aligns with cash flow needs. And for your city, it's a couple steps forward, one step back, wait, 10 steps forward really fast, wait. So you kind of got this push and pull on when you need money. We know you need money for these projects. Why we're recircling up here is given some of the developments on what's happening on Knowles property. There was some thought process here that we need to get the TIF collections rolling on a larger obligation there, and you have to get that done by December 1st. So that part of that's timing, because every year, or I mean, if we miss December 1st, you essentially lose a year of collections on that area. So kind of using this logic, there's some dollars available that would allow you to pay off the project. In the neighborhood of probably $600,000 here, potentially in the first year. So we're just trying to plan the overall capital. So that's why this switched a little bit. There were some conversations that could we add it to the borrowing that you approved at your last meeting and still kind of work the timing. And I decided it's a large enough amount, not really large compared to what you need, but large enough compared to the financing side, that we should get the council back together again and just make sure if you've got questions, we can address those and what that structure looks like. Could we do a standalone loan for it? Yeah, we could, but we're going through the legal documents. It's going to be neater, cleaner to just have them in the same one.
And for those who are new to the process, when we talk about a TIF district, I'm going to kind of simplify this, but
Go for it.
we can designate an area in town that is receiving growth, and you can certify that base. So just picture down where Absolute and Godwin's Flex Space and Ballard 5 and eBank and Fairway, we could capture that territory, freeze the base. Any increment over that, other than debt service, we can claw back to pay for debt on a project. And so when you hear TIF district, there's a lot of ways that they can be used, but in this case, we're kind of referring to, okay, we've got a set territory, we've frozen the debt capacity or the evaluation on that. Any increment in that tax valuation we can capture, other than school, county, and city debt service, and you can use that increment to pay debt back. So that's the mechanism of the income that allows us to not have to take it from the general fund, which isn't very large because our tax base isn't big enough yet, but we can capture that increment to pay for debt.
And you don't have to raise taxes then on the rest of the public. So the dollars that are associated with the TIF district are typically revenues that already would have been going through the other government bodies. This is an economic development tool, obviously, for the council to consider. And the places where we see this probably played out the best is when you get a development, then you use that development's work to seed money the next development's work, so then that development pays back to the community faster than it otherwise will. Otherwise, you're going to wait for that new development to pay back. So you have an opportunity to capture some of the existing development to put towards seed money to kind of bring some better return on the future developments. So we put together what I'll call kind of our normal packet. So we've got some profile information in there. I'll move pretty quick through it. I'm going to get to the meat in the middle, which is kind of talking about the current financing. And then we'll also zoom back out kind of big picture, right? There's a lot of projects going on, and we just want to make sure that we address kind of what the capabilities are for the council and city going forward. So there's a valuation profile, just a breakout by class of property. One of the things that you see there, we've just been talking about TIF. So if you look in the bottom table, there's a TIF valuation listed at the bottom there at 20 million on the current fiscal year, which is 24 values for fiscal 26. Absent doing something with this new project, you would have likely have seen those valuations drop. So we're not talking about stealing away other valuation, just trying to keep that TIF valuation from dropping, keeping that economic development tool in place for the city as you continue to grow. Most growing cities have a strong movement towards that. The city of Grimes has a very significant portion of their city in the tax increment financing district. So when you're sitting there like, well, how in the world are they able to do this and this and this? And they're saying they're not raising taxes. Well, a lot of it is because they are capturing revenues out of the TIF district to do most of their work. They have to have what we call a pre-95 TIF, which means it has no expiration. So it just goes on forever, and it was in place before the community really took off. So I wouldn't call it a blank check, but it's probably one of the closest things you have towards having a blank check for development. Now, obviously, they have to deal with the growth of their city and services, so they do have some checks and balances there. The second page, then, slide 5, is valuation profile. It shows your valuations as they sit right now, and it looks back 15 years. So you can see there's a valuation called actual for rollback. That's the most important one. That's probably limiting a lot of your plans right now because it controls your debt limit as a city. So as a city, you can only have property tax backed debt equal to 5% of your constitutional debt limit. So that's that 258 million number that's listed in the top of the debt limit section. As you move forward, there's a few different valuations. There's total taxable for your debt levy and then your operating budget. And so you can see this last year, your operating budget valuation actually went down. Well, that's because as a city, you claim more tax increment financing dollars. So it limits the operating budget portion. But you can see the prior 3 years were very substantial growth in the operating budget because you had let the tax increment side go down. So it's not like it caused a big shift in how the city was able to put their budget together, but it was a change in that. By and large, your valuations have been growing between 7 and 8% over the last 15 years. Did throw together just a quick tax rate chart. Most recent year there's at the top for this current fiscal year, sitting right at 1523. You bounced around a little bit in that range. Going back 15 years ago, a little closer to $16 per thousand. So pretty consistent tax rate overall for the city. This is despite some of the changes that have occurred with respect to the legislature. So you can see a few things. For example, the emergency levy went away in 2024, but your general fund levy was able to float up to 825 from the prior 810. So just a few minor tweaks going on tax rate wise. If you do flip over then to residents of the city of Granger who are, depending on where they live, are going to pay Polk County or Dallas County taxes. They're all paying the school district taxes. And so for the city of Granger, the good news is that whichever county line you're on for this one, your overall levy rate is about $2 per thousand lower than it was about 10 years ago. It's not to say taxes went down. Everybody knows assessments are going down, but the good news is they're not stable tax rates, which means at least some of the drop in tax rate or increase in valuation has been offset by a drop in tax rate. Your general obligation debt profile, this would be prior to any new debt that we're talking about here. There are a couple we call SRF loans, so those are state revolving loan funds for water and sewer projects. You have an ambulance and police obligations outstanding that you're working on getting paid off, and then a loan from 2024. I'll say that was a smattering of items. It covered some seed money for Sycamore. It covered a little bit of Southeast River Middle area work. And then it had a water project, a TIF project, and then it also had some of the engineering costs related to public safety in there. So a little bit of that is the allocation for the voter authorized public safety center. That authority still exists, right? It's as you work through the budget, right? Just some budget constraints there. So right now it's on the back burner, but not off plan. We continue to keep it on plan. It's just where it fits in the order of magnitude for development. In this case, you've got a couple street projects and developments that are important for driving growth forward. So we do anticipate as your valuations continue to grow, the margin of that counts against that debt limit becomes smaller. So, as a percentage of your debt limit, 5 years ago, a public safety center was a stretch, right? We're talking being between 20 and 25% of your debt limit. Well, today it's less than 20, right? So now it's getting to be a more reasonable piece of your overall debt limit while continuing to take on the developments that I deal with.
Travis, does that approval expire in the public vote theory?
In theory, no, right? And so I think it's just continuing to keep the ball moving forward and that it doesn't completely shift from what it was. So I think that's where the danger would lie in that, the public voted this project and now it's turned into that project. So is it still the same project that they authorized? Now, timing, for various reasons, we've seen projects take a long time. I have a bond referendum vote that was a few years ago for ADM schools. They're building basically a $100 million high school complex. Well, that's in phases, right? So they're taking care of the academic center first, and then they've got an elementary renovation, they've got a middle school renovation, and then the last piece of the project is they will bring back the athletic complex pieces onto the new high school site. But that's 6-7 years after the vote occurs. But that, again, was all communicated that way. It was passed. Indianola is in the same way. They voted the high school, they're building phase 1. In academic space, they're coming back with phase 2, which is a gym. It was all voted at once, but it's going to spread out over 6-7 years. So I think once you get beyond 5 to 7 years, you're starting to think about, is it the same project? Should we go back and ask for reauthorization? Do we need to update the budget? There's some logistical things that would say you could go back to the voters for, but by statute, there's not an end date authority. So it's more of a touch and feel. How does it feel for a voter? In our minds, though, we're still, iterating it on the plans as we go. It's not something that's off the radar of the city's financial plan. There's a little bit of detail on the 2024 allocation and structure. Not a lot that we need to hit there. As we move to the debt profile, I think this is an encouraging component. And all I've tried to do here is take your current, this is the first chart on page 10, is look at your current levy rate, which is a 434 levy. Within that levy rate, in the current fiscal year 26, you're basically at full utilization, right? That's how it has to be with your budget. As you move forward, then those blue bars represent available resources within a 434 levy if valuations continue to grow at historical paces. Now, I typically chop this chart off 5 years early, right? Because at some point it'll be difficult for you to grow 7% on your valuation base. It just won't always happen. It can't. It can continue for 10 or 15 years. I think everybody thinks that there's a good possibility of that. So when we start looking at your debt profile, it's been very well managed in terms of looking at available resources. While you've got some commitments, working out to 2034, I think you should feel pretty good that you've got some ability to continue to take on projects as we go forward. Looking at the debt limit profile, again, I would say kind of a similar component here. And your utilization hovering at just under 20% right now. So you see that line, that light blue line that kind of runs through the middle. That's indexed off that right side. So you can see about 20% utilization right now on your debt limit. I've got the chart right now looking at what could fit within a 80% target and then what's the 20% margin on top of that. To my knowledge, the city doesn't have a formal policy to live at 80%, but it's not a bad idea to reserve a little bit of capacity for the project development that comes up that might be necessary for some infrastructure investment.
That's basically what we try to keep for surprise projects or huge opportunities or emergency type stuff.
Yeah, I mean, you want a little, lack of better term, some powder in your keg, right? If you need to do something to incentivize a major developer to come into town, you don't want to be completely tapped out. Now, look at neighbors over in Monterey. They were not totally tapped out, but the fact that how large the Amazon facility was coming in, it tapped them out. So they had to do an alternate type of debt in order to sell bonds to fit within their constitutional debt limit. So they had to pay a little bit of premium, maybe 50 basis points, 25 basis points to issue that type of debt. Well worth it to land, Project Blue Jay.
Travis, for everybody in here, maybe
Yep.
answer this. What kind of projects fit in the debt limit and affected and don't? Sycamore or Public Safety Building would, Water Tower did not, right?
Water
Yeah.
tower.
Correct.
Go ahead, Travis.
Yeah, you're correct on that. Property tax back debt. So anything that's property tax, or I should say tax back debt, because I think there's a case that being a local option sales tax debt that would be sold would also count against your constitutional debt. Pure utility revenue debt, because it's rate-based and rate-payer, does not count. So water sewer revenue debt would count. The stormwater
So this graph includes the Sycamore debt.
does not.
Does not include.
You will see the chart in the same way today. So this is all pre-Sycamore. Again, we put utility debt profiles together here. This picks up the water projects. You had to lean into some rate increases here for water, and from that standpoint, the offset here is balancing what takes place in your user growth. Like we're looking at moving total revenues up 14%. Well, if you cover off 10% of that with user growth, then you can set your rates accordingly. For now, we have to solve for debt coverage to be greater than 110. Giving you a little bit of margin because we don't think you're done with water projects over the next 5 years. So, don't run this thing down to as narrow as you can, and then you have to set up for another rate increase. So, sizable rate increases for the next couple of years, and then hopefully kind of settling in more to inflationary-based increases. On the sewer side, following page.
But you offset that with growth.
Correct.
So,
Yep.
when people tell me we don't want to grow, I don't necessarily object, but, in order to provide the services that we have, we have to grow and spread this user base out so that we're reducing that rate. I mean, we held off on that water tower. You know, we should have built a water tower and we were at 1,400. You know, we're around 2,000-ish probably, and if we did another census, and so we've got to grow to cover that debt.
Yeah, and that's part of the hard part, right? Is kind of hang on to this, like, I'd really like the growth to pay for it, right? And not have to do it on users. So you try to split the balance here. So then on the sewer side, where you've already got some. Good, yeah, sure.
Just really for the three guys in the audience who are running and taking over some spots.
Okay.
The
That's one back
interest,
of
was it the SRF loan for us to get approved for that? They told us we had to increase water rates, or was it Travis who came in? We basically were told.
I'm the
we had to-
messenger. I'm the messenger for that.
Okay.
Yeah,
So to
SRF.
get that SRF loan, we had to increase water rates. It really wasn't like even a conversation or choice that we had if we wanted to do the water tower.
We thought our growth was going to be aggressive enough to where our existing water rate ordinance would cover it, and the state disagreed. So they said, if you wanted the SRF loan at the interest rate, you got it. You got it.
They wanted a more reasonable one that could be used by any community. Now, at the end of the day, if the growth occurs, you can reset your rates once you get to the 5-year mark of the loan. But you had to hit the qualification process. We had to get the rates in place. Otherwise, they just won't give you the loan. So we went back and forth a few different times and ultimately settled on, okay, they let us use 1-year aggressive growth because we could potentially see that with housing starts, but then had to use more like inflationary user growth until we got past that. Because we were not doing a 1-year ordinance, but a 5-year ordinance and trying to estimate rates.
Well, and just to piggyback that, right, the decision then was, do we want the SRF rate at 2.4%, or do we want to take a general obligation debt at 4 or 6%, and that counts against our debt limit, which we didn't want to do, right? We want to keep that in the water sewer area.
Yeah, and the sidebar on that is like, see, in GO, you still got to raise revenues high enough to pay for it because you don't want to use necessarily debt service levy when you're trying to preserve that for some other projects like street improvements, et cetera. When we look at the sewer, I took a different approach. While you've got some debt outstanding, I think that date's wrong. I don't think that was a new debt then, but we had put in a 5% user increase and then just looked at a 3% inflationary rate. And then we were looking at, could that function a $2 million project moving forward on infrastructure? Because you have not yet gotten this sewer project that I illustrated here, right?
Is that what you're talking about?
But, yeah, this $2 million.
So if you're looking at slide 13, it's the 2.68% new column, second column.
Yep, correct. That's not an actual obligation. I should have labeled that differently. But this was a hypothetical that we were running to try to get, okay, so if you continue on your new user increases, how much infrastructure can we start moving there? Because ultimately, for a city that's growing like yours, trying to get away from using any sort of debt limit obligation towards utility revenue debt is advised. Because not having that in place, and you have just some very small older loans in place that they've been there for a long period of time. Those have to get you debt limit. Doing a $2 million sewer infrastructure out of your debt limit or a $4 million water project out of your debt limit are things that would cost your ability to do public safety. So, part of this has been a shift in thinking that, user rates have to get to supporting the revenue net. Now, can you support it with TIF and do other obligations? Yes, but in some ways you step back and you're like, $1 of the patron's resources, whether it's coming from a property tax levy, their water bill, their sewer bill, it's all dollars coming out of there. The constraint that the city has to deal with is the constitutional debt limit and tax back debt. So in order to preserve your economic development flexibility, and the ability to keep the public safety and Knowles and Sycamore all on schedule, the goal was try to keep that stuff moved off of the debt limit obligations. And most growing cities have made that shift. But if I were to pick cities of 1,000 across the state, yeah, there's going to be some general obligation support in there because they're not worried about, you know, a trunk line sewer that's going to cost a couple $1 million to open up the development, right? You can't spend your debt limit on water tower projects, for lack of a better term. And the fact that you were able to get through as much as you could with the water tower, the flexibility that the SRF was giving you, I mean, that's even, not called a miracle, but I mean, they were certainly pretty flexible in giving you this preferred loan rate, even though in some ways it is helping the growth, right? The SRF loans are meant to handle infrastructure issues on hand and not allow communities to grow into them. So typically we would have had to go to a regular revenue debt, which then also makes you have a higher debt coverage ratio. So you can only obligate 75% of your available revenues towards debt instead of 90%. So that would force you to raise rates higher for you a traditional water debt as well. All right, kind of long-winded for that section, but thanks for bearing with me on the financial profile. Okay, so dealing with the current financing that we have right now, there are multiple hearings dating back to spring 24. One of them, I put generic, that's not the right term, but there's 2.5 million of ECP, or essential corporate purpose projects, that you held a hearing for back in the spring of 2024. So as a reminder, essential corporate purpose projects are water, sewer, street infrastructure, essentially, and then you get fire trucks, not fire stations, police cars, not police stations, right? That's the kind of the way I think about it. If you move on to various things like city halls, public safety centers, fire stations, etc., those fall under general corporate purpose. Depending on the threshold, those have to go to referendum, which is what you had done on that project. But the ECP hearings or essential hearings are primarily designed for regular infrastructure needs of the city, and you have unlimited ability to hold hearings for those amounts. You just have to give public notice. There's actually no ability for the public to veto those projects. You know, they can't garner up a bunch of petition signatures and say, no, you can't do your water tower project. Now, could they show up at your council meeting and make you feel really uncomfortable for it? Certainly, right? That can happen. But there's no veto power. This is deemed an essential city function to be able to provide for water, street, and sewer infrastructure. Thus, you have very good abilities to leverage those resources. So we did that back in 2024, thinking that we would, get along with doing the Sycamore project as part of the thinking there. As we work through this financing process and talking with the attorney, we actually held $3 million for Sycamore back in 24, but used $500,000 of it. So the attorney wanted to just go ahead and hold a clean hearing for Sycamore at $2.5 million. Since you were already doing the park hearing in 950. Essentially what that means is you've got almost doubled up hearing authority, but they're generic essential projects, which is nice because it does give you some flexibility to take on other road projects that come up. We do see this from time to time. Cities will hold hearings for a street program. They may not know exactly what streets they're doing. They just know that they would like to prioritize financial resources towards that street project. So you're sitting pretty good for authority. I'd argue that right now we have authority to borrow almost $6 million on essential corporate purpose projects and the park project in Blackwood. It's not what's being proposed, but that's what exists for authority. In terms of structure, and this is probably as relevant for potential future council members that are sitting here. As you think about the city's position right now, you are becoming a large small city, we'll say it that way. part of that transition out of small city land is, when do you get audited with audited financial results? As a city right now, you have audit findings that take place. There's a review of your financials. The city is not spending $25,000 a year to have a formal audit done. It's not required by Iowa statute for a community of your size to do that. However, most cities of
We are audited, but on a limited basis.
a limited audit, yep, you're right. So you don't have to have the full-fledged exhibits in your audit. The problem you will run into as you move forward is market access to capital. So to date, your access to capital is limited to sophisticated investors such as area banks that know who you are, know your size, but I can't go to, say, a lender like JP Morgan, Wells Fargo, and say, here, will you do this loan for the city? And they're like, okay, send us the audited financials, and we'll review it and put it in our financial model. Now, you guys may have great financials, but you don't check the box for a big box bank that wants to lend. Is that a problem? Not necessarily, except when you want longer term infrastructure, fixed rate infrastructure. So typically what you're going to see in community banks is a more limited ability to do rate locks beyond 5 or 10 years. So you're not saying you're stuck in construction loans, but you're kind of stuck in a cycle of rolling debt and making sure it fits. Every community who grows like this has a stage in their development where it works like that. And so for your city, it's thinking about, okay, when do we want to step up and start adding this as an expense? I'd argue that, $240 million of assessed value getting pretty close. There are more called small, medium-sized cities, think like a city of Cresco or something like that in northeast Iowa, that have a tax base probably of a similar size, but they've been that size for a long time, and they've had audited financials for a long period of time. So it is something to be thinking about as we kind of move forward. I think we can improve some of your market access to capital. Eventually bond rating for the city, the ability to compete with the rates that the big boys are able to get. Now, your local banks are great to work with. They're fantastic people. They do a great job. We had good communications with this debt, but I think you just want to make sure that you're not all of a sudden limited, right? It's like, okay, now you reach a number of $5 million of debt with an organization, and can they keep their lending limit high enough for that? Well, on a bank they probably can, but there are some other community banks that aren't able to increase their lending limit to an individual entity over $5 million. So we have to get focused on bringing other banks into the fold for city performance. So soapbox there a little bit, but I just wanted to make sure we communicate that as we kind of think about this going forward. Now it could be more city staff needed as well. Like it's all of a sudden, while you're doing all the journal entries, there's more journal entries, there's more of a chart of accounts to manage, there's interactions with the rating agency. Do they get this put in place? Not rating agency, but auditing firm. They get this put in place in time. There's an accrual process that typically could end over the fiscal year depending on how far you go on the audit process. But again, something to be thinking about as you guys are planning. There's good resources for your city manager, finance director being talking about it. And I'm not saying get it in place for next year, but I think there should be a path forward for when you want it to take place. Is that fair?
How long term fixed money can you get by going to the big box banks?
15 to 20. If you get to the bond rating side of the equation, you can go out the full 20 pretty easily. So we would do a fixed rate 20-year GO today, probably in the 4.25 range.
And we just borrow what percentage for 5 years?
You're looking at 4.5, but you have a ability to pay it off at any time. So that's kind of your piece in the hole. We can restructure that whenever we think that there's better market access or ability to lock rates. I'm not giving up on being able to find a bank that will lock longer with unaudited, but I just know like the big profile of the, the 5 national banks we would say will not touch it until you get an audit.
And that audit's roughly 25 grand.
It varies. I think that's probably pretty close. Have you ever shopped it or? Probably just what you've heard in your groups.
Right, yep. I mean, right now, just the audit that we have is around 8 to 10.
Yep.
That's all right.
And that's limited. I mean, they're not giving you a set of financial exhibits or anything that you can run with. They're doing the work to make sure that you're.
So essentially, we're thinking of a $15,000 increase to do the full one set audit and have open market to drive rates down on longer terms.
Yeah,
So
and
2-3 years ago, when interest rates were 3% or whatever on the private side, you probably could have had a lot less than they're now.
spread is still about the same, right? At that time, even a year ago, eBay locked 10 years. I think there's a little bit more nervous about locking out some of the inflationary pressures right now. So that was a stretch for them to go to 10 last time. So 5 was their preference. Now they'll amortize it for 20. They just want to be able to reset their rate, which it's not always the worst thing in the world. It could reset down. It's happened before. Like you may be the one to want to take the money away and have it from market access.
But as we grow, we'll start biting off more. It'd be worth looking.
Yeah, not an immediate thing, just something to get underway. So we will have a little bit of balloon structure, so that just means we have to get that restructured at some point. We think within the next 5 years, there's going to be a lot more clarity about your long-term debt profile, what we want to pay out of TIF, what we want to pay out of the levy, what might be available for other types of debt resources, including, if there's some water and sewer revenues to throw at some of these projects. If you think of some of your infrastructure projects that are street, water, sewer infrastructure, it would be appropriate for you to take some money out of your water and sewer and actually put it towards those capital projects on an annual basis. That doesn't count against your rate setting needs, but it would be some of the surplus capital. You're not there yet, right? You're not ready to set your rates to be able to support some various infrastructure developments that would take place. But if you think about it, if you have a main street repair that's going to be street, water, sewer infrastructure, practically you should have water and sewer left over to put towards their portion of the project, not necessarily out of the debt service level. But again, each city operates slightly different. I'm just telling you what a lot of communities think about that. We do have a tax exempt and taxable component, just some of the timing, the land purchase, for example, the parkland was quite a while ago. So now as we're kind of putting that together in financing, it's more of a reimbursement than it is a current infrastructure cost. So it goes under the taxable component. So the main reason for the meeting, hit on this already, getting some seed money for your next project in place, engineering, getting the TIF claim ready for December 1st, and preparing for some cash flow timing on the project. Admittedly, we're a little bit slow getting this infrastructure put in place. Hasn't hurt you because rates have continued to drop, other than Christine looks at the bank account and is like, okay, kind of get to the end of it, we need that property tax drop, probably okay for another month or so. Right? These are some big cost capital items for a city community your size. It's hard, as we talked a year ago, even to cover the engineering out of surpluses. Your city's operating budget just isn't that big. So to be taking on these large infrastructure projects, it probably requires a little bit of what we call seed money or engineering money out of debt proceeds. So this would potentially start that with $600,000. That was a number that, from talking with your engineer, they thought would get you through June of next year on the goals. That's being considered. It ends up not going through, can be reallocated to other projects, or in this case, if you have surplus proceeds and we restructure, then it just goes away. But you do want it in place for the TIF plan this year. So I've got 2 different allocation structures right now. We are still working on finalizing the taxable rate of the bank. Should have that done in the morning. Shouldn't keep you from authorizing moving forward tonight. The rate that's been given is 4.5 on both the taxable and tax exempt piece. Taxable piece is a little bit shorter, a 3-year. Tax exempt is 5-year. All of it's callable anytime, and right now we're at a $3.45 million borrowing. That's shown on page 16. If we slide that up to an extra $600,000, we also probably have a little bit more breakout on the taxable side. So we do think the taxable may move for 5-year, tax exempt would be 5-year. We think the tax exempt rate stays at 4.5. I think the taxable might slide just slightly higher, still be callable anytime. In this case, borrowing goes to $4,050,000 and covers the park borrowing, a target for some Knowles money, and then Sycamore, basically $2.5 million going towards that project. All of this currently can fit within the debt levy, but obviously as we look towards potential Knowles project as well as the park project, there are some TIF resources potentially available there. But right now we are sizing it so that it will fit, at least for this first year's payment. So before we go into kind of the overall capital infrastructure, questions on the move up to $4,050,000. So I think that's really the authorization. You'll note the heading at 950 and 2.5 covers what was held for the hearings. If you remember talking back a few slides here, we had some generic ECP hearings that we talked with your attorney. She was okay with using those towards the Knowles allocation.
You said that 600,000
Yeah.
got us to roughly June,
Yep. Right.
and that was for what exactly? Engineering or actual infrastructure?
Mainly engineering and some initial testing costs, and maybe a little bit of the start of construction. I think was a lot of it said. But 600,000 being kind of the maximum target, because that will get you to where your TIF claim needs to be for the year. Could have just done 4, but he thought 6 would make your cash flow safer if we got into June. He didn't want you to end the fiscal year with a deficit on that project.
So basically what you're asking for tonight, Travis, is whether the council wants to use slide 16,
Yep.
3.45, or updated 4.05.
Yep.
And you said both of these fit in our debt levy number, so the debt levy wouldn't have to go up.
Yeah, we'll be fine with the debt levy for this year. We'll have to explore when we need to do any infrastructure in between these last 2 loans. In terms of talking with trying to get a longer fixed rate amortization with eBank, we agreed we'd take some time over the next 9 months to try to explore some of their longer fixed rate project or products, and if those are amenable to it. For the time being December 1, be able to slow this thing down anymore, given the cash flow needs that you have.
Jeremy, Jared, any appetite?
600 is necessary before it goes. Right?
To do the preliminary engineering and maybe any of the early
What's
infrastructure.
the timeline to get the sewer built? Is that a 2-year timeline-ish?
Faster, I think, they thought.
Yeah, we thought that we could turn it on, I believe, within 18 months. So they're going to be, if we proceed, they would be building at the same time we're building, and we can hit that target date. We can turn it on when they need it turned on. Now, what this also does, this covers not only west of the Orchard property, but the goal is to shove it under the road of 141, which would then cover east of Twin Eagles. So that hillside, there's a current farm where current owner has unfortunately passed, and then the next land is owned by Reza and Hope K, which is a developer in the community or in the metro. So it would cover development, some mixed use and commercial up front, transitioning back to residential housing.
I'm pretty certain I know the answer to this, but we're by no means committed to spending the 600. We're just earmarking it.
Yeah, we haven't committed anything.
Yeah. This isn't the commitment on.
Right, I just want to make sure this.
Yeah.
If you end up pivoting, there are other infrastructure projects that would fall under the ECP that you could use that money we designated for. Or if you decided not to do the project, you just use it to pay down on the loan. But this would get you to that TIF claim. I think it would be ideally, right, we know a little bit more on the timing on Knowles and the council's authority there. Given that we're not holding this is not related to a specific hearing for Knowles, it's earmarked for Knowles, it gives you the flexibility to cover off other infrastructure projects. You know, if you just walk up on Warren and say, yeah, we decided to just do a street repaving and it costs, $600,000, whatever it was, you can do that. It's under that ECB area for it.
Jody, you still with us?
Yes.
All right. So do we need an action now, or do you want us to go forward?
Let's spin through the rest real quick.
Okay.
But I just want to say that that's what's being asked of you.
Yep.
We put a couple things in place here. And this is just more looking at on page 19. I just call this a quick payment calculator from the standpoint of thinking about infrastructure costs up and down the left side, 4 or 3 different structures, 20, 15, and 10 years. And all we're putting in together here is a ballpark estimator for the community and the city if you want to figure out what an infrastructure piece costs standalone, right? In this case, if we look at the $950,000 and we look at that over a 10-year structure, the second line down would be it's $818,000 a year would have cost you 83 cents on your loan, right? So part of using this tool to kind of gauge a cost for your infrastructure when you're also considering interest costs. So if we've got a $4 million project over 20 years, it's $307,000 a year. It would cost you $2.15 on your levy, or you can leave a TIF claim in place for $15 million in TIF valuation, and it'll spin off $300,000 a year. Right? So those are the types of things that we're kind of building this for, not only to show the levy equivalent, but then also what the annual payment would be. And so as you start thinking about projects like Knowles, talking a little bit more long term there, let's look at the existing TIF cash flow. Can we monetize it? Then can we use the development to pay it off early so we can have seed money for the next development? Right? That'd be the approach we'd most likely be asking you to consider. As you move forward then, if I were to have my brothers and just kind of throw together a Sycamore, Knowles, and kind of other infrastructure piece, in this case, probably this Sycamore also include the park. If we had thrown through full amortizations on these schedules at your 434 levy, we could have done all of those projects plus another 1.2 million, only relying upon about 40 more years of valuation growth. And it would all fit within 434. Right? So in this case, you would see that on the far right side. That's surplus within the 434 levy rate shown on $8.6 million worth of projects. Now, how you carve those out, I threw names on there because there's a reference to them, but the community gets to decide, right? That could be some of your prioritization. And that's really what I think we're moving towards, needing to make decisions as you kind of think through before we put permanent financing in place, what all needs to be included here. I'm showing you getting $8.6 million out of the levy alone. We've talked about covering some of those projects out of TIF. So from a debt levy perspective, I would make 2 comments. One, you can keep leaning on it and use TIF for paying off debt more quickly. Great idea with your debt limit strapped. hate to pay it off faster than 20 years. Or you can lower the debt limit. Now, I'm not necessarily endorsing that until you get a few years through this, right? You gotta keep pushing pretty hard here, but, long term, at some point, the city of Granger doesn't need to have a $4.34 debt limit. It can fall as your tax base grows, if your infrastructure slows down. But that's the thing, you may be in a position where the infrastructure's just not going to slow down. You don't have your entire city set up to run a perpetuity TIF, so you might have to lean on the debt service levy more than like the Ryans might have to. You won't be able to differentiate yourselves. They have a different set of tools in their toolbox for economic development than what you have. It's neither right nor wrong, you just might have to lean on the debt levy a little bit more. So the real crux in your limiting factor probably comes down, and tonight threw that in chart form. Kind of similar, if you throw these debt obligations in and allow your valuation to grow to 434, you can see it's a little bit messy, but you kind of see that remaining infrastructure. Once you get beyond 2031, you can see you can cover these 8.6 million, valuations continue to grow, you keep on the 434 levy, you still have some ability to take on other projects. Probably the more pressing issue comes down to this debt limit profile. Debt limit is always a snapshot of time. So we take the current snapshot of June 30th, 2.1 million outstanding, a $246 million valuation for a $12.3 million debt limit. You're using just under 20% of that at this point. A lot of that driven by a significant assessed valuation growth from a couple years ago. Made this a lot easier to balance. We used to be showing scenarios where you would move closer to 80%. Currently, we're showing those in the 60s. It's a really good spot to be. If you were to press me on, when can we throw, public safety in there, 26, 27, 28, all sort of are in the ballpark. I would say 26 feels maybe a little crunched. I mean, that would definitely push you over. You'd be then prioritizing that over Knowles. You can do that in your borrowing plans, certainly. But this shows the ability to take on those projects and still stay in that 60% debt limit. So if you took on another $2.5 million of debt, you're going to crank this thing a little bit north of 80, but not too far. And again, if you can show me, well, we go to 80, but the valuation growth and the development that we got right now is supporting keeping that debt limit in position, then certainly you'll be in a real good spot.
Travis, can we go back to 21 real quick?
Yeah, sure.
You have new 1, new 2, new 4. Can you just tell me what you have those?
Oh yeah, those follow through those payments on the prior page. So the payment infrastructure there on new 1 is, I think that's the Sycamore. The Knowles is new 2. Yeah, I think Knowles is new 2. And again, I only went out to 45 here to get out of the way. And then the new 4 is that 1.2 million that I just thrown in there to kind of carve out the 8.6 million. Yeah, I guess I should have taken that chart out for a couple of years. Yeah, we have payments out of 40. Is that all?
Yep.
Everybody doing okay so far? I know this is
Okay,
a lot of information. So again, feeling out this debt limit, right? You get another banner year of valuation growth here next year, this year, next year. It's going to put you in a pretty good position to say, yeah, we feel pretty comfortable now with debt limit constraint on that public safety project, while still being able to knock out the priority infrastructure. But again, some of that comes down to bringing that back to the budget, right?
And all of this is premised on, we don't know what's going to happen to capital in January. The property tax reform.
Yeah, I don't know anything about that. I just appreciate that.
You're welcome.
Yeah, we don't know right now. Probably what we do know is that there's been more talk out of the governor's office about an alternate plan as opposed to what has been talked about with what I'll call Dawson's plan, Senator Dawson's bill that made it through committee last year, but then did not advance. That becomes the bill of record for property tax reform, but what we're hearing is there's other options being considered.
Just be aware of it, and it's going to affect us.
Yeah, and you're already impacted by House File 17. There are aspects of the new bill that make your city's budget maybe easier to predict, but may not give you more flexibility. I think it really depends on that growth profile. Last slide then, just kind of picking up that debt limit profile in the chart. This existing, that does include, maybe existing and proposed is a better term. So that is picking up your new debt. And you can see out through 2031, it peaks just under 10 million. If you're following on the line off to the right, we're staying in that 55 to 65 million dollar, 55 to 65% of your constitutional debt limit. And again, going back 5 years ago, 3 years ago, even 2.5 years ago, that was clipping over 80, trying to put these projects in much closer to 100. So it's part of the genesis for, well, we can't get the public safety in place with the budget, and then it's also putting that much strain on the debt limit. Let's hit pause, figure out the development, and be ready to hit it when we're in a slightly better position. I would say you're there. Whether that means you have to go start that project next week, next month. No, I'm not necessarily saying that. Let's maybe get this one rolled through, kind of figure out goals, and then be ready to, when we have the evaluations, revisit what structure looks like this week. Does that sound like a good approach?
So if you wonder why I'm stumping on growth, it's to lower those charts.
Yeah, a couple of questions related to that, if I could.
Oh, yeah, please.
Knowles is in city limits, right?
Yeah.
Perfect. And then the proposed extension of the new sewer under 141 into the farmland on the north side that is current farmland, that is also within the new annex city limits?
Yeah.
Okay.
Both of those are in now.
Yeah, and then the thought process is then we would push to get Knowles to get more assessed value to better these projections. And then we could then use that to perhaps refinance some of this maybe, but definitely also as a basis to better the city's position from a financial perspective on these future projects.
Boost the tax base, which once that project happens, what is occurring Wednesday night is that DOT meeting to look at how do we push 17 down to 102nd. It opens up that end. So Eichner's 54 acres, Beaver Creek Estates, which was previously called Knowles, and then still have Brian Etchen's orchard. He plans on selling, he just hasn't decided when. Kind of his retirement thought, so it could be a ways out, but he's planning, wanting to make sure his land has access. So we're looking at 102nd down at Xavier being a corridor with Benavetti's farm behind Willis Auto. It's 190-ish acres back there. Langfit owns some ground on the east side of Xavier, and then you go around. You have Eichner's 54 acres at the intersection, and then you have Beaver Creek Estates being developed, and then you have the orchard, and then you jump across and you have all that land.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons that the southern area is important, right? It's not just to develop that down there, it's going to gravity, sewer, everything. And then once we are going way out to 121st, I think we worked with Bob, we'll need one lift station, and then we can basically take everything we're annexing, right? So it's a strategic location from a utilities perspective to capture all that growth.
Yeah, I mean, there's kind of going back to this idea of a couple takeaways, and we'll handle those. But the permanent debt structure, I think we just need a little bit more context on the sequencing of these projects, right? Could we have thrown together something more permanent? Yeah, but we were going to pay a higher rate than what Revolve was able to do with the reset. So the reset made sense there. I know we put a note on the audited financials there, and just kind of any remaining questions to be addressed. I get a lot of information here tonight, and I intend on going to an hour, but sorry, Tony.
That's all right.
Should know better.
It's helpful.
Should have known better.
You're still faster than the other girl.
So, from this standpoint, on our end, a lot of good things happening in the city. Got a great profile for growth. Certainly have some needs, right? And, just kind of put it all together. It happens, but it just doesn't always happen as fast as everybody wants it to in terms of sequencing projects. You gotta wait on the DOT to make decisions. All of that comes into play. What do you got here?
Who's this?
That's my old self.
I'm just kidding.
15 years ago? I don't know. Thanks
All
for
right.
the reminder.
Yeah, no, appreciate
No,
it, Travis.
I'll suck it in and make
No,
it
you're good.
closer.
Any questions from the council for Travis? Any other things we can talk about?
No, it's slide 16 or 17 is our decision for us.
Yeah, I think so.
I feel like recommendation is slide 17, we get the 600 for renewals available to us, so we can make those decisions. We understand what Jared said, we're not obligated to it.
This isn't any decision on Knowles, it's to free up some scratch if we get it.
Okay. That.
Jody, you're good too?
Yeah.
Okay, all right, well then we can have a motion on that.
What's the language here? What do we have on 3B basically?
Yeah, 3B, I think if you say that and with the 4.5.
Yeah, approve updated proposal, 4.05 million was the
Okay. Make a motion to approve the updated financing proposal for $950,000 general obligation and urban renewal capital loan notes and $2.5 million general obligation capital loan notes actually for a total of $4.05 million. So, good?
Okay. Danielson?
Yes.
Schreier?
Yes.
Bermal?
Yes.
All right, well then, we've got to set a public hearing on the amendment to our budget for November 12th, 2025. Council, Christie, I think, put it with the packet. Any questions on that we need to rip through right now, or are we good just setting the public hearing?
That's fine.
Yeah, I think so.
All right.
Is there a motion? Make a motion to set a public hearing on amendment to fiscal year 2025-2026 City of Granger budget for 7 p.m. on November 12th, 2025.
Second.
Okay, Danielson?
Yes.
Schreier?
Yes.
Bermal?
Yes.
All right, and then there were some bills that went to Christie's spam that we have to get.
Yeah, so
get
Bonfire
approval.
sends an invoice to a wrong email address, and then I got a letter in the mail saying account will be closed on Friday.
Rough amount.
So that's the only reason I stuck it on here, and they are actually items that Aaron purchased to replace the stolen property from the sewer project that we have already got reimbursement on. We already got the reimbursement,
What's the
30,000 from.
total?
For this bill is like 3,800 something. This is just Bonfires. The total though that that we got from the insurance company was 30,000. Of course, that's minus whatever was stolen, minus our deductible and so forth. But anyway, that's what it's for anyway. It's
So we
just-
need a motion to approve bills.
Yeah, I need
Just
to-
for Baumgart's
I
only,
just
or do
need
you
to
want?
make Bonfires pay. I don't want them to close our account. They wouldn't work with me, so that's okay.
I'll make a motion to approve the payment for Bonfires.
Second.
Okay, Danielson?
Yes.
Schreier?
Yes.
Bermal?
Yes.
All right, anything else, everybody? All right, adjourn. Thank you, everybody.